raising up from the ruku' and the words that are to be said. And so now it comes to this section or this chapter, which is the prostration. As Sheikh Uthaymeen, he says, ثم بعد أن يحمد أو يحمد الله, after the person praises Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala بما ورد يهوي إلى السجود مكبرا يقول الله أكبر. So after the ruku', as you then come up, you are now standing up and you've said the words that you say to stand up. سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا ولك الحمد, one version of it. Then you say Allahu Akbar, raise your hands as it is, or in this case Allahu Akbar, and then into the prostration. قبل ولا بعد وإنما يقولها إذا أهوى إلى السجود. ولا يقول الله أكبر قبل ولا بعد وإنما يقولها إذا أهوى إلى السجود. So when you have said سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا ولك الحمد, and you are now standing up, from that position now you are going to say Allahu Akbar and go down into prostration. However, note, as Sheikh Al-Uthaymeen says, when you are standing up now out of the ruku', don't say Allahu Akbar and then go down. Meaning, don't say Allahu Akbar before you make your movement down. Rather, he says, you're supposed to say Allahu Akbar as you are going down. During your movement of going down, you say Allahu Akbar. So you don't say when you are standing after the ruku', either with hands on the side or hands back on the chest, you don't say Allahu Akbar and then make your movement down. You actually say it as you are making the movement down there. And obviously you don't say it after you arrive at the ground. So you don't say Allahu Akbar before you start making the movement, neither do you say it after you arrive at the ground. You say Allahu Akbar as you are heading down from that standing position into the prostration position. وروى البخاري عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه التكبير عند السجود وغيره من الانتقالات. And that's mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari from the hadith of Abu Hurairah, that you say Allahu Akbar as you go down into the prostration. Here though, you do not raise your hands. You do not raise your hands to say Allahu Akbar as you're heading down into prostration. لا يرفع يديه. روى البخاري عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يرفع يديه حين يسجد ولا حين يرفع رأسه من السجود. In the hadith of Ibn Umar in al-Bukhari, it mentions that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not used to raise his hands as he went down into prostration, and neither did he used to raise his hands when he came out of the prostration. Because when you're in prostration, then you say Allahu Akbar to come out of prostration. He never used to raise his hands for that one either. So you don't raise your hands when you say Allahu Akbar to go down into prostration. Neither do you raise your hands when you're coming out of the first prostration to sit down and then go back into the second prostration. وَلَا يُقَدِّمُهُمَا إِلَى الْأَرْضِ. So this is one of the differences of opinion coming up here now. When you go down into prostration, are you supposed to make contact with the ground with your hands first? or with your knees first. This is one of the differences of opinion that exist. When you go down into prostration, are you supposed to go down on your hands first? They are the first point of contact to the ground. Or with your knees first? They touch the ground first, then your hands afterwards. Which way around? Sheikh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, whose explanation we're using here, his opinion is that you go down on your knees. That's his opinion. And there is, of course, the other famous opinion on your hands. It's a difference of opinion. Sheikh Uthaymeen says, in his opinion, you go down on your knees, not on your hands. فلا يقدمهما إلى الأرض بل يخر على ركبتيه ثم يديه ثم جبهته وأنفه. So according to Sheikh Uthaymeen, when you're going down into prostration, your knees touch the ground first, then your hands follow, they touch the ground next, then your forehead, and then your nose. That is the order of how you go down. Knees first, touch the ground, you're on your knees, then continue forward and touch your hands onto the ground, then continue forward and touch your forehead onto the ground, and then the top of your nose also. That is the order that Sheikh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentions as his opinion. وهذا كما أنه مقتضى الطبيعة عند السجود فهو أيضا مقتضى السنة. He says there are two reasons why you do it like that. He says, firstly, that is the natural way. That if somebody said to you, prostrate, like if you were to say to a youngster who hasn't learnt the prayer yet, you say to him, okay, the prostration part on the floor, go down and do the prostration. What would be the natural way that he goes down? Shaykh Uthaymeen says the natural way you would expect of a person is to go down on his knees first, then his hands, then his head. That would be the natural order of how he goes down onto the ground. That could be disputed, but this is what Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions. Naturally, that's how you would go down. If you say to somebody, go down into prostration, it would not be a natural movement for them to bend down, but then go forward onto their hands first, then touch their knees afterwards. So he says, the natural way of doing it would be your knees first, and then your hands second, then your head at the end. But that isn't the proof, of course. He says the sunnah indicates you do it like that too. According to this opinion, the sunnah indicates that you do it like that too. One of those narrations that is mentioned is in Sunan al-Nasa'i and Sunan Abi Dawud from the hadith of Wa'il ibn Hujr radiyallahu anhu. قال رأيت النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا سجد وضع ركبتيه قبل يديه. This seems to be very clear. Narration says, I saw the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم when he prostrated, he would put his knees down to the ground before his hands. He would put his knees down first, then his hands. That seems to be an explicit narration, highlighting that the knees make contact with the ground first, then the hands make contact afterwards. However, there are other narrations that bring this topic into some type of discussion, and it's not as clear cut as that. One of those again is in An-Nasa'i and Abu Dawud, hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا سجد أحدكم فلا يبرك كما يبرك البعير وليضع يديه قبل ركبتيه. This narration is disputed over in terms of its meaning, because it can be an evidence that you put your knees down first, but it can also be an evidence that you put your hands down first. Both sets of scholars have used this same hadith to prove their point. The first group used this hadith to prove it's down with your knees first. The other side, they use the very same hadith to say that's a proof it's your hands first. How could it be used for both? Because the hadith says, إِذَا سَجَدَ أَحَدُكُمْ. The Messenger ﷺ said, when one of you goes down to prostrate, when you prostrate, فَلَا يَبْرُكْ كَمَا يَبْرُكُ الْبَعِيرُ. Then do not go down like the camel goes down. A camel, when it's standing up and then it sits down, there is a certain motion and movement and method that the camel uses to sit down. The hadith says, don't go down into prostration in the same way that a camel sits down, in the same kind of movement, in the same method as a camel when he sits down. فلا يبرك كما يبرك البعير، أي على صفة بروك البعير، والبعير إذا برك يقدم يديه قبل رجليه. And how does a camel go down? When a camel wants to sit down, is it the front legs that get bent first or the back legs that get bent first? Does a camel sit down backwards on the back side with the back legs going down first, then the front one's coming down? Or does a camel sit down with the front legs going down first, then the back end coming down? Which way? The front. When a camel sits down, the front legs of the camel bend first, then the back of the body comes down. So the narration says, don't go down into prostration the way a camel goes down to sit down. And how does a camel go down? Front first, then the back. So based upon that narration, we are not allowed to go down into prostration front first and then back. Front first would be our hands, and the back are the legs. If we go down hands first, we are going down into prostration front first, and the legs are the back. The hadith says, don't go down like a camel goes down. Do not prostrate in the way that a camel prostrates. So the camel goes down with the front legs first and then the back legs afterwards. We are therefore prohibited to go down with our hands first and then our knees afterwards, because if we went down with our hands first, if we went down with the hands first, then we would be going down upon the same form, the same description of how a camel goes down. So the scholars, like a Sheikh Uthaymeen, would use this evidence to further back up the opinion that you go down with your knees first. So don't go down like a camel who goes down with its front legs first, then its knees afterwards. You need to do the opposite. Don't go down like a camel, the hadith says. So go down with the legs. Go down with the legs first, the knees first, then the hands afterwards. However, It's coming up. فالإنسان الآن في مقام عال وشريف بين يدي الله كيف يتشبه بالبهائم فيضع اليدين قبل ركبتين. The Sheikh says, when you are praying, you are in a noble act of worship. You are in a noble act of worship, in a position of nobility and honor in that act of worship. How could you behave in the way that an animal behaves in that prayer? How could you go down with your hands first into the prostration and therefore imitate the way that a camel goes and sits down? The Sheikh says that would not be befitting. It would not be correct, and that's why the narration tells us not to go down into prostration like a camel would go down. But then how could the other group of scholars use this same narration to prove that actually you go down with your hands first when you go into prostration? You touch down onto the ground with your hands first. How could they use this same hadith to make their point? The very same hadith they use. The same one that says, do not go down like a camel goes down onto the ground. They say, إذا قدم ركبتيه فإنه برك كما يبرك البعير لأن ركبتي البعير في يديه والبعير عند البروك يخر على ركبتيه. What is known about camels is that the knees of the camel are considered its front legs. Because camels don't have hands and legs, they just have two sets of legs. The front legs of a camel are considered the knees of the camel. The front legs of the camel have knees, of course, and the front set are the set of legs that are considered the knees of the camel. Amongst the Arabs, that's how it's known. The front legs of the camels are considered its knees. And yes, of course, in the back legs there are knees too, but the ruling of knees is on the front legs of the camels. If that's the case, then that means camels go down on their knees. And the hadith says, do not go down like camels go down. Therefore, we cannot go down on our knees, and therefore you have to go down on your hands. That's how the other scholars use it. They say, yes, you're right. The messenger told us, do not go into prostration like a camel does. They said, okay, how does a camel go into prostration then? The camel goes into prostration on its knees, because the front legs of the camel, known to the Arabs, are the knees of the camel. And so if that's what the hadith is telling us, don't go down into prostration like a camel does, then we cannot go down on our knees. We need to therefore go down on our hands. So you can see how this difference of opinion exists. When you're going down into prostration, do you touch your knees onto the ground first, or do you touch your hands onto the ground first? This hadith where the messenger said, don't go down like a camel goes down onto the ground, it could be understood that the meaning of it is, don't go down in the appearance of how a camel goes down. In the appearance of how a camel goes down, it goes down front first. So if you understand it like that, don't go down how a camel goes down on the ground in terms of the appearance of how a camel goes down, regardless of knees or anything. The appearance, the method of the camel is to go down front first. So if that's what the hadith means, then we cannot go down in the same method as a camel goes down. Which is therefore, we cannot go down front first, which is hands first. We therefore have to go down with our knees, they say. But the other group of scholars, they say no. The meaning of the hadith, don't go down like a camel goes down, is talking specifically of the fact that a camel, when it sits down, it bends its knees first and sits down on its knees first. Then it bends the back of its body. So if we're looking at it specifically like that, it then means we cannot go down into prostration like a camel does. A camel goes down with its knees, and therefore we cannot go down with our knees, and we're supposed to go down with our hands. So you have a big difference of opinion between the scholars on that. When going into prostration, do you go down with your hands first and then your knees touch afterwards? Or when you're going down, do you go onto your knees first and then touch the hands down afterwards? Difference of opinion exists on that. Sheikh Uthaymeen, of course, takes the opinion that the meaning of the hadith, don't go down like a camel goes down, is talking about the method. That a camel goes down front first, so you don't go down front first on your hands. Go down back first on your knees. It's about the method of how a camel goes down. But that's the opinion of Sheikh Uthaymeen. Others, they take the opinion, no, it's not the method, it's about the specifics. A camel goes down when it sits down on its knees first. So if we're prohibited to imitate a camel, we have to go down into prostration, hands first, to be different to a camel. So you can see how that ends up in that difference of opinion. And this is actually also the same as the previous position. When you come out of the ruku' and you say, Sami'a Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana wa lakal hamd. One version. When you come out there, where do your hands go? When you come out of the ruku', where do your hands go? Where do you put your hands? By your side, or the other opinion?
Chest.
On your chest. There is one opinion when you come out of the ruku', Sami Allahu liman hamida Rabbana wa lakal hamd, that your hands are just down by your side, and then you say Allahu Akbar and go to prostration. The other opinion, when you come out of ruku', Sami Allahu liman hamida Rabbana wa lakal hamd, and you put your hands back on your chest. So what are the evidences for those two opinions? One evidence, or one group of scholars who say that it is supposed to be back on your chest. They have some strong evidences. One of their evidences is, again, this first evidence can be used by both sides. The first evidence they use is, there is a narration, I think it's coming later on in the chapters, there's a narration where it says, when you stand up out of the ruku', then let all of your bones go back to their positions. Let your body go back into its position. So now, one side of the scholars, they said, okay, so when you stand up, what is the position of the body? What's the natural position of the body? If you say to somebody now, stand up. You say to somebody, stand up. Are they going to stand up and without you telling them, stand up and put their hands up here? Are they going to stand up and put their hands out there? Without you saying anything, you just say to them, stand up a minute. Are they going to stand up, put their hands here? Are they going to stand up and put their hands here? If you say to somebody, stand up, they're just going to stand up and their hands are going to be down by their side. You say to somebody, stand up a minute, they're going to stand up and their hands are just going to be down by their side. That is the natural positioning of the hands. It's not a natural positioning of the hands. You say to somebody, stand up, and they stand up and they put their hands here, or they put their hands here, or they do something else. You're going to look at them and say, what are you doing? I just said stand up. Not with your hands this or that or anything else. The natural position is just down by the side. So the scholars on that group, They say, look, the hadith says when you stand up, let your position, your bones go back to their natural position. That is the natural position when you stand up. The other scholars, they use the same hadith. How can they use the same hadith? How can they say this is the natural position? How?
They use it to be like back into the state it was like when
Yeah. Because they say the hadith says when you come out of ruku', then go back, let your bones go back to their positions. What position were your bones in before you went into ruku'? You were standing there doing this, and then Allahu Akbar into the ruku'. So if the hadith is saying let your bones go back to where they were, your hands were here. You weren't praying like this here before. Your hands were here. So that's your bones going back to where they were. So they say, look, that's what it means when it says your bones go back to where they were. The others, they say, no, this is talking about your body. Naturally, your bones go back to their position, which is here. So again, you see how that difference of opinion can arise. They have other evidences. The ones who say you put your hands on your chest. One of their evidences is, it's a logical kind of evidence with the sunnah. In the prayer, there are 4 positions. There are only 4 positions in the prayer. What are the 4 positions of prayer? Standing, that's the first one. You start, you're standing. That's one position of the prayer, the act of standing. The second position of the prayer is the act of bowing. The third position of the prayer is the act of prostration. That's another different type of position. And the fourth position you can be in the prayer is sitting. 4 positions in the prayer. You're either standing, you're either bowing, you're either prostrating, or you're sitting at the end. 4 positions in the prayer. Every single position of the prayer, we know exactly where our body is supposed to be. In prostration, we're going to get to it later on, inshallah. There's hadith telling you exactly 7 body parts have to be touching the ground, where your fingers have to be faced, how much gap, everything is mentioned. Ruku', we just gone through it last week. Hands on your knees, fingers slightly spread open, grabbing your knees, arms wide, further away from your body, wide. Everything about each position has been clarified. So looking at the standing position, which we spoke about previously as well, stand in the natural position. Your feet are not together as some of the Sufis and their likes. They stand with their feet right next to each other. Not like that, not far apart, in the natural position, standing. So there are 4 positions in the prayer. The scholars, they say, is there any 5th position? There is no 5th position. There are only 4 positions. They say when you come out of the ruku', before you go into the position of prostration, you come out of the ruku' and momentarily go into the position of standing. You're into the position of standing before you go into prostration. When you're in that position of standing, what is your body posture or shape or form supposed to be like? When you start the prayer in that standing position, how do you stand? Feet at a natural position, facing the Kaaba, the Qibla, with your hands, right one on top of the left one, over your chest or stomach area, right one on top of the left one. The standing position of the prayer, that's the only one. The only standing position of the prayer is when you're standing with your hands, right one on top of your left one. They say when you come out of ruku', are you not back into your standing position? You are. So go back to how you should be in your standing position, which is like this. They say, where have you got this 5th position in the prayer from? Where you stand without your hands on your chest or on your frontal area. Where have you got this 5th position from? They say, where in the Sunnah does it mention any kind of position in the prayer where you stand with your hands just hanging down by your side? They say there are only 4 positions. The standing one, we already know, it's with your hands, right one on top of your left one, over your chest or stomach area. So they say that's it. When you come out of ruku', you're in that standing position. So go back to doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing when you're standing up. Put your hands back to where they were. And there are some other evidences, but again, there's that difference of opinion over that because there's nothing explicit on that. It's not like there's a hadith where it says one of the companions, I saw the messenger coming out of ruku' and he put his hands back here. Then there wouldn't be any difference of opinion. It's not explicit like that. So then the scholars, they examine the evidences and what is mentioned, and they made their deductions as to where the hands are supposed to be when you come out of ruku'. So some of them say about the hadith, go back to the natural positions, leave it down by your side, like a Sheikh al-Albani. And others, they say, no, natural position to where you were, which is back here. So they have their evidences for that. And the same here on this issue. When you now go down into ruku', are you supposed to touch with your hands first on the ground, then your knees, or your knees first, then your hands? And you can see those evidences that they use here. There is a hadith where it says, do not go down like a camel goes down. وَلْيَضَعْ يَدَيْهِ قَبْلَ رُكْبَتَيْهِ. There is this version of the hadith, but the scholars, they differ over this version. This version says, do not go down like a camel goes down, but rather you must put your hands down first before your knees. So that one seems to be explicit as to what the intent of the hadith about the camel is. Don't go down like a camel goes down. Put your hands down before your knees. So that hadith would back up the position of the scholars who say that the hadith is talking about the specifics of how a camel goes down. Specifically, a camel goes down on its knees first. This narration says, don't go down like a camel goes down into prostration. Go with your hands before your knees. But then if that narration exists like that, what are the scholars who take the other opinion going to say about this? The ones who say, no, it means you have to go down with your knees first, not your hands. Because the camel goes down front first. You can't go down front first. You have to go on your knees. But this narration explicitly says, go down on your hands before your knees. How could that group of scholars explain this? One of the explanations they have goes back to the sciences of hadith. They say this narration is actually, they call it munqalib or maqlub, that it is something which has been accidentally turned around, accidentally flipped around. That the narrator, when he narrated this hadith, when he was narrating it, he made a mistake and the words were swapped around. That he actually meant to say, don't go down like a camel goes down, but rather go down with your knees before your hands. But he accidentally narrated it without, sometimes you say the wrong word first by accident, you swap your words around. He said accidentally go down with your hands before your knees. That's what they say, that the narrator made a mistake and swapped the words around. Of course, the other scholars are going to say there's no proof for that. There's no proof that he turned his words around. There are evidences to indicate this is legitimate and valid. You go down with your hands first and then your knees afterwards. So that is one of the differed over issues on the prayer, whether you go down with your hands first or with your knees first. Sheikh Uthaymeen does say though, so he takes the opinion you go down with your knees first, then your hands. He says, however, من كان عاجزا أو كان في ركبته وجع أو ما أشبه ذلك فلا حرج عليه أن يقدم يديه قبل ركبتيه. That if somebody was incapable of going down with their knees first, maybe somebody elderly in age or some knee problems or whatever, you can't put your weight, your body weight onto your knees straight away going down. So the Sheikh says in that kind of situation, if somebody has a problem like that, then you can go down with your hands first, but that is only an exception. That is not the rule. That is an exception to someone who needs that out of necessity. Otherwise, you go down with your knees first, according to the opinion of a Sheikh Uthaymeen. And according to the opinion of some of the other scholars, it's the other. You go down with your hands first. So you just have to look at those evidences, look at those positions, and then decide which one you believe to be stronger, and then you follow that opinion. So now then, you've gone down into sujood. When you're in prostration, how do you actually do the prostration? يَسْجُدُ عَلَى أَعْضَائِهِ سَبْعًا. There are 7 body parts that have to be making contact with the ground. 7 body parts that have to be touching the ground in the prostration. The first is the forehead and the top of the nose. Not the tip of the nose, the top of the nose and the forehead. A lot of people make the mistake that touch their forehead and just the tip of the nose. It's with your head down in the ground, forehead and top of the nose going into the ground. And that is considered as one body part. That is considered as one body part. The top of the forehead and the top of the nose, they touch down into the ground. That is one body part. Your 2 hands, that's 2. So we're at 3 so far now. Then your 2 knees, that's 2. We're at 5 now so far. And then the tips of your feet, your toes on both feet, they are 2, 7 altogether. 2 feet, 2 knees, 2 hands, forehead and top of the nose as one part, 7 parts altogether. Those 7 parts must be in contact with the ground for the prostration to be valid. Those 7 body parts must touch the ground. لأن الله أمرنا بذلك, and that is something Allah has commanded us with. It's in Sahih al-Bukhari from Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, أمرت أن أسجد على 7 أعظم. I have been commanded to prostrate on 7 body parts. And then the Messenger mentioned them in the hadith, على الجبهة, on the forehead, and in the hadith the Messenger pointed to his forehead and nose, or pointed towards his nose, واليدين, and the 2 hands, والركبتين, and the 2 knees, وأطراف القدمين, and the edges or the ends of the toes, ولا نكفت الثياب وشعر, and that you don't roll up, fold up your garments or your hair. You don't tie up, fold up your garments or your hair in the prayer. So we know that there are these 7 body parts that a person must make contact with the ground on for that prostration to be valid. بعض الناس يسجد ويجعل الظفر الإبهام هو الذي يلي الأرض والباقي مرفوعا، فهل تقول الإبهام مس الأرض أو الظفر الذي مس الأرض؟ هذا غلط، وأنا أشك في صحة هذا، بل لا بد من نوع اتكاء. The Sheikh says with the feet especially, people may not do that properly. They may only be making contact, for example, with the big toe on either side, and the rest of the toes are not touching the ground. And they should be bent, touching the ground, facing forwards towards the Qibla, and all of them making contact with the ground. The Shaykh says some people may be a bit slack on that, and they barely touch their foot down properly, all of the areas of the front of the foot. So that is something to pay attention to. So now then, those are the 7 parts. The hands. Where exactly do you put your hands relative to your body? Are they supposed to be right next to you under your body? Are they supposed to be far out in front of you? Where exactly are you supposed to position your hands? It's mentioned in the hadith of Sahih Muslim of Wa'il ibn Hujr, فَلَمَّا سَجَدَ سَجَدَ بَيْنَ كَفَّيْهِ, that when the Prophet ﷺ did the prostration, he did it between his hands. So now we know for sure your hands when you prostrate are not going to be in front of you, because the Messenger prostrated in between them. So we know from that narration they're going to be somewhere to the side of you. Your right hand somewhere to the right side of your body, the left hand somewhere to the left side of your body, not ahead of your body, not at the level of your head or ahead of your head, but somewhere more towards the sides of where you are. And it mentions روى أبو داود من حديث وائل بن حجر فلما سجد وضع جبهته بين كفيه. In one narration it says that his hands were positioned in line with his forehead. One narration mentions that his hands were positioned in line with his forehead. Another narration says they were positioned in line with his shoulders. So you have one in line with his forehead, another one in line with his shoulders. It mentions in the hadith of An-Nasa'i, حتى رأيت إبهاميه قريبا من أذنيه فلما أراد أن يركع كبر نعم to the end ثم كبر وسجد فكانت يداه من أذنيه على الموضع الذي استقبل به من الصلاة. This one again the same as the first one, that the hands were in line with his ears this time. So there is one narration his hands were positioned in line with his forehead, another one his hands were positioned in line with his ears, another one his hands were positioned in line with his shoulders. Those three positions are mentioned, not ahead of your forehead. Rather it has to be from the forehead to the shoulders, somewhere there. Somewhere there, from the forehead to the shoulder area of where you are on the ground, that's where your hands have to be. فاليدان لهما مكانان إما أن يكون محاذين للجبهة والأنف ومحاذيين للجبهة والأنف ويكون السجود بينهما ومن يكون متأخرين على حذو المنكبين. So the Sheikh says basically two main positions, either a little bit forward lined up with the forehead or a little bit further back towards the shoulders. Those are your two areas basically. That's the first thing in terms of the positioning of the hands. Then you're also supposed to put them down flat onto the ground. Put them down flat onto the ground. Also, the fingers are supposed to be towards the Qibla. They are supposed to be facing towards the Qibla. And as Sheikh Uthaymeen says, in the prostration position, they are not supposed to be spread out. They're supposed to be together. In the prostration position, on the ground, fingers together towards the Qibla. And that's mentioned in some of the narrations. وَضَعَ يَدَيْهِ غَيْرَ مُفْتَرِشٍ وَلَا قَابِضِهِمَا وَاسْتَقْبَلَ بِأَطْرَافِ أَصَابِعِهِ الْقِبْلَةِ. So they don't go flat onto the ground, neither are they raised off the ground, but there is something of a small gap, but they are basically on the ground, but not pushed down flat onto the ground. On the ground with that little gap that may be there, with the fingers facing towards the Qibla, but not raised like this or flattened completely onto the ground. Just a normal kind of position, facing towards the Qibla with the fingers together. Then you are supposed to be in, again, a natural position in the prostration. A natural position in the prostration. So you don't make the prostration extremely long. Your head right over there, your legs right back there, stretched out. You're not supposed to be so far stretched out. But at the same time, you're not supposed to be so squashed up that your thighs are touching your stomach. Your thighs are not supposed to be touching your stomach. You're not supposed to be that squashed in together. And neither are you supposed to be completely stretched out, far out. It's going to be in between those positions. In a natural kind of position that you can hold and it's stable and steady. Your knees, your thighs are not touching your stomach. There's a gap there. But you're not collapsing forward so far stretched out to a medium level of comfort, of stability, with the gap between the thighs and the stomach, a normal, natural kind of position that you are stable in and that you can hold. The Sheikh says it's a mistake how some people think you're supposed to stretch out so far in the prostration. He says that's even a bid'ah. Some people, they think it's more reward, make your prostration long and stretched out. Your head right down there, your feet right down there. It's not like that. There is no sunnah to do that. And the other way around as well. You're not supposed to be squashed up together with your thighs onto your stomach all together. So in an average position. Then so we know the hands, let's assume then you're going with the shoulders. Your hands are placed by your sides in line with your shoulders. Then your actual arms, they are not supposed to be stuck on your body. Many people, they prostrate and their arms, their elbows are stuck on their sides, stuck on their bodies. That is not the way. They are supposed to be lifted away. Your elbows lifted away from the body, lifted away, and there's a gap under the body, under the arms. So ينصب ذراعيه يرفعهما فلا يبسطهما على الأرض. You are not supposed to put your arms flat down on the ground. Your arm, your hands and your forearm and your elbows are not supposed to all be flat on the ground. Only your hands are supposed to be touching the ground, not your forearm, not even your wrists. Just your hands touch the ground, your wrist, your forearm, your elbow, the rest of your arm is all up, away from the ground, away from your body. There's a gap under there. That is the way that it should be done. وَارْفَعْ مِرْفَقَيْكَ. It mentions there in the narration, raise your elbows. So that's important to remember. Many people, when they prostrate, they stick their arms, attach them right next to their body. Their arms are right all squashed up together in that small position, and that isn't the way. The arms are supposed to be away from the body. Of course, the only exception to that is if you're in the congregation. In the jama'ah, you can't do that. In the jama'ah prayer, you cannot prostrate like this with your arms out and elbows up. Impossible in the jama'ah with the person next to you on each side. There you have no choice but to keep your arms further in, to fit into the jama'ah, fit into the row. You have to keep them to an extent closed up a lot more. But otherwise, when that situation isn't there, you're praying by yourself or you're praying sunnah, etc., then it is raised up and the elbows are taken out. It mentions in the hadith, كان إذا صلى فرج بين يديه حتى يبدو بياض إبطيه. That the messenger, when he used to pray, he used to put his arms away from his body in the prostration to the extent that his armpits were visible. They could see his armpits, or the armpits were visible. So that indicates your arm is completely away from the body in the prostration. In another narration, it even says that he used to prostrate with his arms away from his body like this, to the extent that if like a small baby sheep or something was to come, it would be able to walk under the gap. Mentions in a hadith, لو أن بهمة أرادت أن تمر تحت يديه مرت. If a small sheep or something came, it would be able to fit and go through that gap under his arm where he was prostrating. So that is the position of the arms. We've already mentioned about the stomach. The stomach is not supposed to be touching your thighs. There's supposed to be enough of an extension in your prostration that your stomach does not touch your thighs. And the 10th thing here to remember is the feet. The feet in the prostration are supposed to be touching each other. They're not supposed to be out separated. You're in the prostration at the back, your feet are supposed to be touching. And there's not supposed to be any gap. And the toes are supposed to be on the ground facing towards the Qibla. On the ground facing towards the Qibla, your toes and then the rest of your foot going up. Toes down, bent, facing towards the Qibla direction, and the rest of your foot propped up. That is the way that the feet should be in the prostration at the back. One of the evidences for that as well is that famous hadith in Muslim of Aisha radiallahu anha, where she said, one night I noticed that the messenger wasn't in the bed. And so she became concerned, or she was looking, where has the messenger gone? And it was dark, of course, no lights or nothing in those days. So she said, I was looking around. The messenger wasn't there. And she was looking around and he was praying. Messenger had got off the bed and he was praying. Just at the bottom of the bed there. He was praying. So it was dark and she couldn't see, and she was thinking, where's the messenger gone? And so as she looked in the dark, complete pitch black, her hand came onto the feet of the messenger. So she realized, of course, he's there now praying. But when her hand came on the feet of the messenger, he was in prostration at the time. And so her hand touched the heels of the messenger at the back. So indicating when he was in prostration, he had his feet like that with the toes forward and the back of his foot and his heel was up, such that when Aisha was looking around, feeling around, her hand went onto the back of the foot of the messenger like that. So that indicates that is the way that the foot is placed within the prostration. Some of the scholars, they said that the feet don't have to be touching, that there could be a small gap depending on the shape of the body of the person, the size of the person. It may not necessarily require them to be touching. There could be a small gap between them. Some of the scholars, they mention that. وقال بعض العلماء لا تضم القدمان وتكون بحسب الإنسان. وقال بعض العلماء لا تضم القدمان بل يجعل بينهما مقدار شبر. Some of the scholars, they say you leave a handspan between them. It's an opinion. One foot, the other foot, just a handspan between them. That is an opinion. So there is an opinion saying you can leave a small gap between them, an opinion saying you can leave a handspan between them. However, the evidences seem to indicate that it is touching. These are the evidences and these are the opinions about leaving gaps do not appear to be strong. What appears to be strong is that the feet, they are together in that prostration position. That is the closest to the sunnah and the evidences. So the hands, we already said, your elbows and forearms, they are not to be touching the ground, they're going to be up and separated. And the last thing that it mentions in the narration was that you are not supposed to tie up your garments in the prayer. So tying up the garments, if somebody has long sleeves or long trousers, of course they are impermissible anyway, they're not supposed to be past the ankles. But then it's not correct for a person to fold them up and pray. It's a mistake in the first place that they are beyond your ankles, that's a sin anyway. And then on top of that, it's not correct that you then fold in the prayer. So really what a person needs to do is make sure his garments are tailored and organized so that they are above his ankles in the first place. So he's not committing a sin out of the prayer, and neither does he have to then fold those garments up in the prayer. So that is also mentioned in this particular hadith. That's where we'll stop on for today then. Inshallah ta'ala. We'll carry on from that section, from the prostration area. Next week at the same time. Now the class is fixed at the same time every week, 7:30 p.m. Every Friday, 7:30 p.m. inshallah ta'ala. So we'll carry on with it from next week. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Any questions or anything?
So about the prohibition of folding the garments, like what if like someone's trousers are long and then they like just keep them folded permanently? Is that also included in the prohibition? Or?
Yeah, in the prayer they are folded. You're not supposed to have them folded, even if a person typically has them folded outside. A person should just tailor them, get them sorted out so they are arranged above your ankle. No need to fold anything.
You touched on not tying your hair. Can you elaborate on that? Is that, for example, a woman who has her hair tied? Do you think they should untie it when they're praying, or?
This is in reference to the men especially. Women, if they have plaits and they have other types of things, it is not necessary for them to open all of that up for the prayer. But this is talking about the men in particular, tying up their hair or having other forms of knots put into their hair. Men shouldn't be tying up their hair like that. Women, if they have plaits and other things which are complex in the way that their hair is tied up, then it doesn't require all of that to be opened up for the prayer. Anybody else?
Is there a hadith where the Prophet prohibited prostrating like a dog?
There is a narration, do not prostrate, how a dog sits. A dog when it sits down, so again, comparison to animals, when a dog sits down, its front legs are all touching the ground. From the joint onwards, the full thing is touching the ground. So that's what is prohibited. Don't prostrate like a dog sits down, so don't put all of your arm down on the ground in prostration, rather have it up. Alright, we'll stop on that for today then. Insha'Allah ta'ala, continue next week then.